Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th episode of Thriving on Mission. I'm Matt Rogie, the show's host. This week's episode is an interview I conducted on February 13th, almost 7.5 weeks ago. And today on April 6th, as I prep this episode for publishing, I know that most of my listeners are under some type of stay-at-home mandate. I'm praying for your health, your jobs, and your families in these difficult times. And now, on with the show. So here I am with Jenny, and she's the founder and co-founder and CEO of the Eddy Furlani Tadpole Foundation. Hey, Jenny.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here, and really excited about this show because the previous show I talked a little bit about my experience with Tadpole last year, and then also, and I related it to that letter that my sister-in-law Brandy wrote, and pulled out a couple little key things from there, and really of how there's so much more deeper meaning than just on our backpacking trips. So I think the audience will be excited to hear from you, and I talked you up pretty good.
Thanks.
So just getting started, why don't you just introduce yourself, where you live, where you grew up, what you do as a vocation right now?
Sure. So I'm Jenny. I grew up in a small college town at the time in Bozeman, Montana. It's grown quite a bit since I was a little munchkin. Grew up just out in the mountains and wilderness, spent a lot of time outdoors. My parents instilled that in me at a very young age, and spent my whole life growing up there. Went to high school and college there. And then I have two older brothers. One of them joined the Navy and got stationed in Coronado, California. And so I moved out here to be close to him. So he didn't have any family here at the time. So I've been here ever since, about 19 years, I think.
Wow.
So, when we started the foundation, I drug him into it, and he's the other co-founder. So it's been good. Gotcha.
So, and he's still active duty, correct?
He is, yeah. He's currently stationed in Guam, but yeah. He is senior.
Are you allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just kidding.
He does helicopter search and rescue.
Awesome.
And he's been in quite a while. I think he's a lifer. We'll see.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what do you do for is this what you do for your vocation or Tadpole or?
I've got probably 10 things going on. Tadpole is one of them. We'll talk about that. But I'm a single mom. I have 5 kids. So that in and of itself is a full-time job.
Yeah, right.
And, I also work for a hotel management company based out of my home office, which is really helpful. And I just do the pricing for hotels on the West Coast.
Okay. All right.
And then some odd and end jobs in between all of that. And then I run Tadpole Foundation. Gotcha. Which is where my passion is.
Right. Sure. Yeah. One thing real quick, just for your kids, and when I was out there for the second trip last year, and me and Tim, we stayed at your house that night.
Yep.
Next morning, and we got to interact with your kids a little bit. Man, and just to say, you're doing an awesome job as a mom, because I mean they're rock solid.
Oh, thanks.
Just from the little interaction we had, and just the way that they were, just helping out, or whatever, based upon their age range and what they were doing. But you're definitely doing a great job.
Doing something right. They're pretty excited to help out. They love the foundation, and they get all excited when we have these trips going out, and especially when they know veterans are coming over. They they treat the house like a Ritz-Carlton, and they just want to serve you guys, and they get your rooms ready and help out with equipment. So that's important to them. They like it.
Awesome. So are you a veteran?
I'm not. I'm actually the only civilian that's allowed to go on our trips.
Awesome. Well, there was another civilian that went last year, which we can talk about briefly, right? On the, yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit too, because I think that's an incredible story. But so obviously we're here to talk about Tadpole Foundation. So, why don't you just sort of talk through what it is?
Sure. So a few years ago, during my time here in California, 19 years, I met a gentleman. His name is Eddy, about 17 years ago now. My brother introduced us with some other friends, and through the years, Eddy and I just became very close friends, and he was my closest guy friend for 15 years. And he was a Navy SEAL stationed here in Southern California. Mm-hmm. He, obviously just in Special Forces, and as a SEAL went through some traumatic events. He also went through some surgery that put him on some heavy medication, and I think things sort of started to spiral a little bit for him through his career. He developed PTS, and he also had some encounters with some IEDs that caused TBI, traumatic brain injury. He underwent several surgeries on his shoulder and other things. And some of that medication from that, he got immune to, it would no longer sustain the pain. And so, some of that, I don't know that he really OD'd on it, but he definitely just got immune to it and took, a lot of it.
Right.
He was always kind of a heavy drinker, but I think just being in a SEAL sort of stressed that job, definitely made that worse. Mm-hmm. He married a wonderful lady named Andrea. They have 3 children, 1 together and then 2 from a previous relationship. But he had a lot going for him, but really struggled to sort of come out of that spiral that happened, and struggled to be able to find his way and crawl out of that darkness, if you will. Mm-hmm. So a few years ago, he was 3 days away from going into a long-term treatment program here in San Diego. And he took his own life under a bridge in San Isidro.
Wow.
It was definitely, a shock. No one really expected it.
Sure.
But, something beautiful definitely came out of it. So, yeah. Shortly after his memorial service is when the foundation started. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So what was, man, and I just think, 3 days before going into a long-term program, and, and I, unfortunately, I know that there's other stories just like that, and, besides Eddy's too.
Yeah. Yep. There's unfortunately, there's lots of them.
Yeah. And man, heart breaks, and it's just, if anybody's listening even right now, and if this is all they hear, don't go that route, reach out to somebody, and if that's all somebody ever gets out of any of these shows, I think is, there's always help out there, and you're not alone. That's, that sounds cliche because I hear that too sometimes.
Yeah. Yep.
It's all and
just stay.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You do, just stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a few days after his memorial service, I just woke up in the middle of the night. It was 2:33 in the morning, and just literally shot straight out of bed with this idea of the foundation. And it started out with, something very small and just sort of exploded from there. But, I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and I know that what that had an effect on me. Mm-hmm. I'm not a veteran. I'm not a combat veteran. I can't relate to any of that. But, I thought that just being outdoors has to have something good in it to give these guys. And initially it was like, hey, let's get some guys together, some veterans together in Southern California, and just do some day hikes and, mm-hmm. stuff like that. And it just turned into something bigger. And, my brother and I do a lot of backpacking, and, we obviously have all of our equipment, and there's a lot of equipment involved to be able to put yourself in the backcountry for 5 or 6 or 7 days at a time. And, we thought, wow, what would it take for us to get a bunch of equipment for a bunch of guys and just take a bunch of guys in the backcountry for 5 or 6 days?
Right.
And so we just, individually, we obviously didn't have funding at the time. And we just pulled together some extra equipment out of our garage and tried to figure out how many guys we could outfit. I think it was 3 or 4 at the time. Dipped into our savings and checking account a little bit, and we were able to come up with 9 sets of gear to be able to get 9 veterans out.
Right.
And we did our first trip a couple of years ago into the Eastern Sierras of Southern California, and we had 9 veterans on that trip. And it was really incredible what that trip did for some of those guys. And some of the guys that went on that trip are actually still continuing to do some of our other trips. And since then, we've just slowly, piece by piece, grown and been able to accommodate more. Currently, we can take 22 veterans out. And we started out doing 1 trip. And now this year for 2020, we have 7 trips scheduled, and we're trying to squeeze in 1 more. And on those trips, 16 veterans times 7 or 8 trips. So that's the load that we're trying to carry. And then obviously just every year getting bigger and doing more locations, more trips, and helping more veterans.
Yeah. Wow. So which is easier, herding a group of 16 veterans or raising 5 kids? Be careful.
The veterans are easier. They don't complain.
Okay. Hey, another question too I wanted to ask, because, I'm watching the video, and I know there's a little behind the scenes stuff going on right now in your office.
Oh yeah.
So I think I know what you just did when you reached for something to help somebody out. So, hey, you have somebody else that's part of the board of directors. They're actually a critical member of the Tadpole Foundation. And, I would love for the viewers to be able to meet this director. In fact, it's the director of search and rescue, correct?
Yes, this individual is our director of search and rescue. I'll give you a little background and then I'll introduce you. So some of our veterans have service dogs, and they've been allowed to bring those service dogs on these backpacking trips. But some of them don't. And I think we had 2 or 3 trips where we had service dogs on those trips, and other veterans, just the way that they were able to sort of be around the other dogs and what they did to them was what I thought beneficial. And so we introduced this year a service dog into the foundation with the idea that we're going to go through service dog training for this dog, and then also train it to go through search and rescue and avalanche search and rescue.
Wow.
So, there's a lot of training up ahead. And when we're in the backcountry for 5 or 6 days at a time, we're a big group. We don't always stay together because we have some that are fast, some that are slower, some in between. So we've got radios and volunteers and, that type of thing. But I think just having a service dog on those trips will have a pretty good effect with the veterans there and be able to help us out in some ways if something goes wrong. But so we brought on a young lady called Moose.
Ah, okay.
She is our director of search and rescue, and she has some other names. Moose, don't bite that. Moose, no. Moose, stop tearing that up. So the background that you're hearing or seeing me is her biting everything and me trying to stop her. So let me introduce you. She's biting now. See, Moose, say hi. Look.
Hey, Moose.
This is Moose.
Just tearing up your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
She's about 10 weeks old. She's a Weimaraner.
Okay.
And she's got sharp teeth.
Yeah. Well, awesome.
She's very sweet.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. And I was excited when you posted that on Facebook because, I love animals and that we don't own a dog anymore. But I know when I was visiting with my sister-in-law and brother, John and Brandy, and they've got some dogs, and I just always just enjoy just painting about it. And there's something therapeutic about it. And, about just hanging out with these dogs, and probably it's just because they're so willing to just give. And it's
right.
so
And I think they have this, sixth sense where they can feel what you feel, and they relate to you in a way that another human can't. And so I think it'll be really, really good for these veterans just to be around her and do some backpacking outdoors with her. It'll be, just like you said, very therapeutic.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, cool. So the foundation has been, I guess, officially running trips for just over 2 years, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
And about how many veterans?
Right around 80.
Okay, about 80 vets.
Yep. 2 years. So in our first year was relatively less. So last year we had a significant number, and then this year it's going to be even greater. So by next year we hope to be, much higher than that, and the number of veterans that we're able to serve and help.
Awesome. So I would imagine that, there's probably, well, let me ask you this. How much does a vet have to pay?
Absolutely nothing. Our trips are completely free at no cost to them. And that was important to us from day one, was that these trips are for them. They're completely designed around them and their abilities. And we don't want them to pay for anything. We sort of have this running joke that we tell people that veterans can, literally show up in their underwear and we'll take care of the rest. We can clothe them from head to toe with outdoor gear and waterproof boots and, packs and all the gear that it takes to get you out there. So we cover, the only thing we don't cover currently is airfare, which we hope to cover in the coming years as we get more funding. But once they get here, we handle everything after that: transportation, meals, gear and equipment, obviously, guides, everything is included. So there's no cost to the veteran to go on these trips.
That's awesome. So I would imagine that you probably have waiting lists for all your trips.
I wish we did. I hope to someday have a waiting list that, we're able to post a trip and it just sells out in a couple hours or filled. It's been hard for us, honestly, to find veterans to go. And I think a lot of it's just word of mouth and people not knowing what they're out there. But I also think that, when we do find veterans, and all veterans, I think, are very similar. They're very humble in the way that, I don't want to go, save my spot for someone who could really need it. And typically the veteran that says that is the veteran that, could need it. That's the veteran that we want to go. So hold on, I gotta get something for her to chew on. Okay. Time out. Okay. But yeah, I really hope that we are able to fill those spots quickly, and just word of mouth and finding veterans and letting them know that, don't save the spot for someone else. You go. Our spots never fill. We've never had a trip that's full. And in the event that we do find a trip that's full, I'm just going to make another one right behind it to open up more spots. So, as a veteran, if you're watching, you're never going to take somebody else's spot. Come join.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
that's good to know. As I'm asking these questions too, sometimes, just for the listeners to know, obviously I participated in 2 trips last year, so I know a lot of the answers. And you and I have talked a little bit about some of these actual questions. Why aren't more vets signing up? Why do we think? And I know one of my hesitancies, because I thought I was going to go on this trip and I thought it was going to be some backpacking and this and that, but we were going to sit around a campfire, sing Kumbaya, and have to have these big cry sessions to where we tell our deepest, darkest secrets. And
what did it turn out to be?
Not at all like that. It was just a bunch of vets hanging out and, having a great time. And, there was a lot of, as I think everybody quickly realizes that, hey, we're all alike in some ways,
Yep.
even though we all have our different stories. On both trips I went on, there was never anybody that was the puff the chest out, look what I did in the military. You're right. Everybody's very humble, cautious.
Yeah. Yep.
But even for me, as time went on, I was able to learn people's stories a little bit. I was able to share my story a little bit in just a very natural way.
Yeah, and that's definitely the idea, is that, nothing that we do on these backpacking trips is necessarily scheduled or set up that way. We're all strangers. Some of our trips, there are a couple guys that know each other just from being on other trips, but we're all strangers, with an exception of me. They're all combat veterans. They all share similarities in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
They all have different stories. And just, going out and hanging out is the idea. We're not trying to, dump therapy down your throat or get you to tell stories. We're just here to have fun. And if you choose to share your story with someone, either privately or as a group, we're all there to listen and, help you and whatever. But we're just there to spend time outdoors, enjoy the fresh air, and know people on these trails, which has been really fortunate for us.
Yeah.
And just to be among other combat veterans and just hang out and have fun. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely, I think, fits a piece of the puzzle as far as, what is therapy? What does healing look like? And this is definitely something like this can be so beneficial, without a doubt. So that's awesome. We could talk for another hour, I'm sure, just about the trips and how they're set up. Real quick. So where are the trips at?
So in the spring and in the fall, we do this Central California, the Eastern Sierras. Specifically, we do that to keep, because in the summertime in California, those trails are very packed and very crowded. Typically, the veterans on our trips prefer less people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we specifically go in the off season. And then in the summertime, we move to Southwest Montana, and we do backpacking in the Beartooths. We added a couple trips this year to the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone National Park. So we try to mix it up a little bit, add new trips, but intentionally stay in places where it's not going to be crowded.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So this next question I want to sort of, for us to sort of talk about, and I think, it's evident by the way you introduced the Tadpole Foundation and why I got started and who Eddy was, but I've thought about this a little bit. I've thought about you in this respect. How does Tadpole help you?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that.
Where would you be without Tadpole, you think? Or where could you be?
I think that Tadpole, just for me, it's what I'm passionate about. And, I do just backpacking, just me before Tadpole. And
Mm-hmm.
that was just my happy place. And for me to be able to share that with other people, and especially veterans, was just the best way that could have ever played out. I think it's therapeutic for veterans too, but I think it's the same and equally for me as well.
Yeah. And I think, it's something for all of us to hear is that's okay. It's okay to do something that you like doing and that you're getting something out of, not in a selfish way, right? But it's therapy in some ways, I would think.
And I think back on Eddy, you sort of have remorse and regret of what could I have done,
Sure.
And so part of that is me just giving back and trying to put something into something I lost.
Yeah. I definitely see that in you, Jenny. And, more so the second trip that I went, just because we got to stay at your house that one night and saw you setting up and the fact that I don't think you slept more than like an hour the night before, and
probably not.
Me and Tim were like, it's like 9:00 and, we got up at East Coast time. We're like, I got to sleep. And you were still going like a mile an hour. You just got back from the airport with this rental car. And and in some ways, I see the drive behind why you're doing what you're doing. And in some ways it sucks because of what, the reason behind that ultimately is because of, Eddy had taken his life. And we see that, and the reasons I do things sometimes, or Tim or others, that we know we're doing these reasons because, you don't want somebody else to have to go through it.
Yeah.
But, and again, that's just so commendable to you that you're able to take this emotion that's inside of you and channel it in this way that's positive for good, because obviously, unfortunately for Eddy, it didn't turn out that way. Because as a Navy SEAL, you're so capable.
Yeah.
And really, for a veteran, they've already proved so much by volunteering, by going to combat, and they are very capable. And to see something, mental health, TBI, these things that basically just overpower them to the point to where, they make that choice. So, but, I'm glad that you do what you do, and I'm glad, we're connected now with the organization. So I mentioned earlier, and this is just a cool story I want you to share. This past summer, because you do trips. All the trips are open to basically all combat vets except for one each year, correct?
Yeah, correct. So last year we had, I think 5 trips that went out, combat veterans. This year we opened up to, well, actually that's not true. So last year was all combat veterans, and then we opened up our first trip exclusive to Navy SEALs.
Okay.
And we did that trip in the Beartooths back to back, right behind that other veteran trip. Uh-huh. So we had 7 Navy SEALs on that trip. And this year we've extended that even further to, we still offer a trip exclusive to Navy SEALs, but we also added 2 more trips this year so that they can include their spouses. And I think that's an important part of the healing process too, is, yeah, you're working on you, but at the same time, you have a significant other in your life that is helping you to get through that. And so if the 2 of them can, adventure together and share that experience together, it just helps that relationship and helps each other. So we started this year, Navy SEALs and their spouses, and then another trip for veterans and their spouses. So those are new this year. We've had a really good response to that. I think the Navy SEAL trip and spouses is almost full. It filled very quickly. And then we also launched this year our kids program, which is really cool. So Eddy had 3 kids, and that's because he was a SEAL, they're often referred to as frogmen, and he called his children tadpoles. Gotcha. So that's where the name came from. So it's only fitting that we introduce a kids program into the foundation. So the idea behind the kids program is we've got veterans that are deployed for long periods of time, and they come back off deployment and they feel just very disconnected, not only from their spouse, but from their children, because they've been gone for so long that there's just something missing. So our kids program is specific for active duty veterans coming back off deployment, where they can go on a camping trip. It's not backpacking because we've got little ones, but it's camping with their child or children. And it just gives them an opportunity to rebond with each other and catch up on what they lost while they were deployed. So that will start this year in August and September. We'll launch that program.
Well, that's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun, and it brings back some memories when I was deployed, and our son was so little, and so I think that'll be a well received thing by the veteran community.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, like I said earlier, we could talk, and I just love talking about this stuff with you, and because it's a passion for mine too. And again, part of that's selfish because it helps me, but also it just, it's in my DNA to help others, which I think for vets, that's part of our DNA to serve.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. two other questions. Do I have to be a, like Navy SEAL physical specimen to go on these backpacking trips?
Do you have to be like in shape? Is that what you're?
Right. Yeah.
No, you don't actually. And I think that's a misconception is, veterans see backpacking and they're like, oh man, there's no way I could keep up,
Right.
And I give them the itinerary and it's X number of miles and you're climbing X elevation and it sort of scares them.
Yeah.
Because some of them are retired and they haven't done it in a while.
Yeah.
And they've sort of just, gotten into routines that are less active.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, no, you don't have to be. We always have a fairly large group and there's always a couple that are super fast and they just speed up the trail and that's fine. There's usually sort of a middle group. And then there's usually a slower group and we take our time, Me too. Like every day I'm still slow.
Right.
But we take our time. We go at a slower pace. I think 90% of the veterans on our trips have some sort of back pain, which, they're carrying a pack. So we keep the pack weight pretty minimal with our pretty lightweight gear.
Yeah.
And we've had guys that just absolutely can't put any weight on their back and we just disperse their weight among everybody else. And, you're all veterans and you guys actually enjoy doing that and serving other veterans that aren't able to do that. So
that's cool.
You don't have to be in big physical condition. We have some trips that are very intense, they're relatively flat. We don't cover a lot of miles. Any veterans that have, amputees would be very good for those trips. We do kayaking. You were on that last trip that we did in September where we kayaked in. And then, the hike was relatively, it wasn't super steep. It wasn't very long. So. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Then our spouse's trip too this year is pretty easy. So.
Oh, cool. Awesome. That sounds very cool. All right. So last question for you is this just funded by this bank account that you have of unlimited money?
Yeah, I wish. I'll give you a little history on the funding with Tadpole Foundation. So Jason and I, my brother, I told you earlier, we just started it out of our own pocket a little bit, out of our garage. An organization in Corona called the Amber Waves of Grain Beer Festival was actually the very first organization to help fund us. And they raised $1,500 for our first trip. The next year, they gave us close to $1,700. And then this past year, they gave us $2,500. So that organization has been, the one that started to sustain a lot of our equipment and stuff. And then we also had an actual veteran that was on one of our trips, provided some funding, which is sort of interesting for us because it's like I don't want them to fund us. I want some grant or something out there that is made for it. Sure. I want the veteran to not fund us. But so there have been a couple organizations, but there's no grant, there's no big bank account. It's really the last couple of years have been a struggle to make these trips happen. I do a lot of fundraising throughout the year, just taking civilians kayaking and snowshoeing to try to raise those funds. Yeah. Because these trips aren't cheap. They're they're pretty expensive, but whatever needs to happen to make it work is what we do. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just so everybody remembers, and you're raising 5 kids.
Yes.
And you have a full-time job. Right. And you have moose. So, wow. Just thank you so much for that, for just the way that you're serving. And again, I think, the name of this show, the name of this, this Thriving on Mission. And I think you really, you really embrace that because, and again, I know that, that's what I've told people before. It doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time and things are going great, but when you have purpose, when you have direction and for something that you're truly passionate about, you can thrive. And that can be something very small, or it can be something on a much larger scale, like what you're doing with Tadpole. So It's a great example. All right. I think I keep on saying last question, maybe not, but is there a story or just a quick vignette to where you're like, from these trips from a veteran, some feedback maybe you've received or you've heard about that you're just like, man, this makes it all worth it?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you asked that question. We do get feedback, and typically, for the most part, the veterans that go on our trips are typically male. We do have a couple females that come on, but the story is different but fairly common. And the reaction that we get when the veteran goes home from their wife usually is the one that calls or emails and says, "Oh my gosh, what did you do to my veteran? He's awesome. He's happy. He can sleep through the night." We get a lot of veterans on our trips that years they haven't slept through the night, and sleeping underneath 5 million stars among other combat veterans somehow is relaxing for them, and they're able to sleep through the entire night, sometimes not on medication. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And so when they get home, the common denominator is they just have this fire lit in them that they didn't have before. It can be something as small as like, wow, my husband woke up this weekend and just got up and mowed the lawn. It was amazing. He just has this boost of energy that he didn't have before, and this drive to do something more or different that he didn't have before. One of the stories, we had a veteran that was pretty injured, and because of his injuries, hadn't spent very much time away from the house and couldn't put any weight on his back, didn't talk a whole lot, couldn't sleep through the night, was on a lot of medication. His wife actually sort of made him go on this trip. He was real quiet at first. After about day 3, opened up to the group a little bit more. And by the time we left, he had solid camaraderie and friendship among these veterans that he knew that he could reach out to anytime if things were to get dark. Wow. And he went back home, and his wife was just amazed by, he didn't want to be at home anymore. He didn't want to be on the couch watching TV. He wanted to get out and do something and have a purpose. And whatever that trip did for him, I'm not sure. And I don't know how long it lasted for, but even if it lasts for a week, a month or whatever, that's what makes it worthwhile. And I go back to what you're saying, I got 1 hour of sleep the night before those trips, and just the amount of work that goes into putting these things together is so exhausting. And when you get done with them, you're like, man, was it worth it? Did any of the veterans get anything out of it? And then, a week or two goes by and you hear these stories and you're like, okay, that's awesome. It was worth it. Wow. Something good did happen and come from it. So
yeah, that's great. Well, and again, that's my story too, what you just described. And I've talked a lot about that process, and whether it's on the show or just with friends, of what the past year meant for me. And that's why I'm doing this now, is part of that. Again, I can't explain it all, but again, for people that are listening, there's just something about it. And whether it's Tadpole or other organizations, there are so many out there. And I think you're right. It's just for these vets to say, just show up.
Yep. Just
show up. So, well, cool. Well, great. Hey, we're going to wrap this up. Jenny, just thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited for more people to meet you and to learn about Tadpole. Is there anything you would like to just finish up with? Anything you want to say?
Just to piggyback on what you said, just show up. Visit the website. You can look at all the trips that we have going out. I'll post some details up there in the coming week or so. But, if you are even remotely interested in going, but you are reserved or hesitant about it, just go. Just trust me and just go on these trips. It'll be something that you won't forget.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Jenny, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
All right.